The same afternoon they buried his father. Former Navy SEAL Caleb Rourke learned the house he had called home was no longer his. With nothing left but one duffel bag and his aging German Shepherd Ranger, Caleb started walking through a Montana snowstorm toward the nearest town. Then Ranger suddenly stopped. An old radio Caleb had taken from his father crackled inside his bag, even though there was no battery inside it. Through the static came a distress signal from Black Ridge, a mountain its father had warned him never to enter. Ranger refused to turn back. What Caleb found beneath that mountain would force him to question everything he believed about his father, the family that raised him, and the man he had spent nearly his entire life believing had abandoned him. And before the night was over, Ranger would lead him toward a secret that had been waiting almost 4 decades to be found. Before we begin, tell us where you are listening from today. And if stories about veterans, faithful dogs, family, courage, and second chances mean something to you, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories like this. Now, let us return to the afternoon Caleb Rourke thought he had lost everything. The first thing I heard after they buried my father was my cousin telling me I had until sunset to leave the house. I remember that more clearly than the minister's prayer, more clearly than the frozen dirt striking the top of the coffin, more clearly than the flag of gray clouds hanging over the mountains that morning. Maybe grief does that to a man. It takes an entire day and leaves you with one sentence you never wanted to remember. My name is Caleb Rourke. I was 47 years old that winter, 11 years removed from the Navy SEAL teams, and until that afternoon I believed there were very few things left in this world capable of surprising me. I had been wrong before. I was wrong again. My German Shepherd, Ranger, sat beside my right boot while I stared across the kitchen at Dean Rourke, the only blood relative still willing to use my last name without sounding embarrassed by it. Dean was holding a folder from the county recorder's office. Behind him stood his wife, Lorraine, already opening cabinets as if she were measuring where her dishes would go. The house sat on 42 wooded acres outside a small mountain community in western Montana, where winter arrived early and stayed long enough to make a man forget what bare earth looked like. My father Elias had built most of the place himself. I had helped replace the porch after my first deployment. I had repaired the chimney after my third. When my marriage ended, I came back there. When the nightmares became bad enough that sleep felt like another combat zone, I came back there. And when the doctors told Elias his heart was failing, I stayed. For almost 3 years, Ranger and I lived with him beneath that roof. I cooked when Elias became too weak to stand. I drove him 90 miles for appointments. I listened to the same stories he had told me since childhood, because sometimes an old man does not repeat a story because he has forgotten telling it. Sometimes he repeats it because he is afraid no one will remember it after he is gone. Then Elias died on a Tuesday morning before sunrise, sitting in the chair beside his bedroom window. 2 days later, we buried him. 3 hours after that, I discovered the house had never been mine to inherit. Dean tapped the folder against his palm. I am not trying to make this harder than it already is. I looked at him. Men usually say that right before making something harder. Then don't. Lorraine stopped opening a drawer. Dean exhaled. Your father transferred the deed 6 years ago, to you. He nodded. I felt Ranger shift against my boot. He was 9 years old, 78 pounds, black and tan, with a scar running through the fur above his left shoulder from an injury he received years earlier while working search operations with me overseas. Ranger had been trained to find men who desperately wanted to be found, and men who desperately did not. Age had whitened the fur around his muzzle, but nothing had dulled his attention. He was watching Dean. Elias had reasons, Dean said. Then tell me what they were. He never did. That answer bothered me more than the deed. Elias always had reasons. He had reasons for stacking firewood east to west. Reasons for keeping 3 flashlights in the kitchen. Reasons for never driving Black Ridge Road after the first heavy snow. He was the kind of man who could spend 20 minutes explaining why a shovel belonged on one side of a barn instead of the other. Yet he had transferred the only home I had left to a nephew he saw twice a year and never explained why. Lorraine closed the drawer. "Dean, we have a 6-hour drive tomorrow." There it was. Not cruelty exactly, impatience. Sometimes that cuts deeper because cruelty at least admits you matter. Dean looked uncomfortable. "You can take your personal things." I almost laughed. Generous. "Caleb, what about Dad's things?" Lorraine answered before he could. "We will sort through them." Ranger's ears rose. I looked at her. "You'll sort through them." She must have heard something in my voice because she stepped away from the cabinet. Dean rubbed his forehead. Nobody is trying to erase him. But that was exactly what the room felt like. Elias's coffee cup still sat upside down beside the sink. His reading glasses rested on a newspaper 4 days old. A pair of worn leather gloves lay beside the back door. Every object carried the shape of a man who would never touch it again, and already those objects belonged to people who measured value differently than I did. Then Lorraine reached toward the small shelf beside the fireplace. "See." Ranger stood. It happened so quietly that none of us noticed until he was between her and the shelf. Lorraine froze. Ranger did not growl. He never needed to. He simply stared at her hand. "Call him off," she said. Ranger. His ears turned toward me, but he did not move. That was unusual. Ranger, heel. He backed away immediately, yet his eyes stayed on the shelf. Lorraine picked up an old handheld radio. It was a battered thing with a cracked black casing, an antenna repaired with electrical tape, and a strip of faded orange paint along one side. I had seen Elias carry it into the mountains when I was a boy. I had not seen it operate in 20 years. "This garbage?" Lorraine asked. Something tightened in my chest. "Put it down," Dean said her name softly. She rolled her eyes, but returned the radio to the shelf. Ranger walked over and sniffed it. Once, twice. Then he looked at me. That look stayed with me, not because I believed dogs could see the future. Ranger had never needed anything supernatural to understand more than I did. He had his nose, his ears, his training, and an irritating habit of being right. I crossed the room and picked up the radio. It felt heavier than I remembered. "I'm taking this," Dean shrugged. "Fine, I packed 1 duffel bag. That was all. Clothes, my father's old hunting knife, 2 photographs, a wool blanket, Ranger's food, medical supplies, and the radio. I left the medals, I left the furniture, I left the tools I had used for years." Dean offered me the pickup, then discovered the title belonged to the property trust and changed his mind after Lorraine whispered something to him in the hallway. By 4:30 that afternoon, Ranger and I were standing outside with everything we owned at our feet. Snow had started falling, not heavily, just enough to soften the edges of the world. Dean came onto the porch. "There is a motel down near the interstate. I know, I can drive you." "No, Caleb. It is 14 miles. Then I have 14 miles to think." He looked like he wanted to apologize. Maybe he did. But apologies given only after a man gets what he wants are difficult things to trust. I lifted the duffel. Ranger stepped beside me. We walked away from the house without looking back. At least I did not look back. Ranger did once. Then he caught up. The county road followed the river south through a narrow valley. By 5, daylight was already draining from the mountains. Snow whispered against my jacket. My left knee began aching after the 3rd mile, an old reminder from a helicopter landing I preferred not to discuss. Ranger stayed close. We had gone perhaps another half-mile when I heard the first burst of static. I stopped. Ranger stopped with me. The sound came from inside my duffel. I lowered the bag into the snow. For a moment I thought I had imagined it. Then it came again, 3 seconds of dry electrical crackling. I opened the bag and pulled out Elias's radio, The power switch was off. I stared at it. Ranger moved closer and sniffed the casing. "Dead radio," I muttered. Ranger tilted his head. I switched it on. Nothing happened. No light, no hiss. I opened the battery compartment. Empty. I felt the cold more sharply then. "That's interesting." Ranger suddenly turned toward the north. His body became still. Not frightened, focused. Beyond the road rose miles of dark timber, climbing toward Black Ridge, a place Elias had warned me away from since childhood. The warning had never made sense. There were old logging roads up there, abandoned mines, steep ravines. Nothing unusual for Montana. Yet every time I asked him why, Elias gave me the same answer. Some mountains remember too much. As a teenager, I thought it was an old man trying to sound mysterious. Standing there with a dead radio in my hand, I remembered another thing. Elias never said those words jokingly. Ranger took 3 steps toward the tree line. "No," he stopped. "Town is south." He looked north. "North. Warm motel." "North," I sighed. "You are getting stubborn in your old age." His tail moved once. Then the radio crackled again. This time a voice came through. Faint, distorted, human. I almost dropped it. The transmission lasted perhaps 2 seconds. 1 word, maybe 2. Then silence. I held the radio against my ear. "Say again." "Nothing." I turned the dial. "This is Caleb Rourke." "Say again." Only silence. There was no battery inside the radio. There was no logical reason for anything to come through it. Ranger started walking north. I grabbed his collar. Absolutely not. He resisted. Rangers almost never resisted me. I tightened my grip. "Whatever you smell, leave it." Then he did something he had not done in years. He touched his nose against the inside of my wrist. Once I stopped breathing. It was an old signal between us. Ranger had used it during my worst months after leaving the service, when a smell, a sound, or an unexpected movement pulled my mind somewhere it did not belong. Nose to wrist meant one thing: pay attention to me. Stay here, stay now, but I was not having an episode. My pulse was steady. My vision was clear. "What is it?" He pulled north again. I looked toward the forest. Snow was falling harder. Every survival instinct I had said to continue south. I had little food, no tent, limited winter gear, and darkness less than an hour away. Following an aging dog into unfamiliar mountains because an empty radio had spoken to me was the kind of decision I would have mocked another man for making. Then the voice returned. Static exploded from the radio, louder this time. Beneath it came something unmistakable, a sequence. 3 short bursts, 3 long, 3 short. I knew it immediately. SOS. Ranger pulled against my hand. That changed everything. If someone was transmitting from Black Ridge, they might be injured. They might be freezing. They might have minutes instead of hours. I clipped the radio to my jacket and followed my dog into the trees. Ranger found an old logging trail less than 200 yards from the road. Snow had nearly erased it. The trail climbed sharply through lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, turning north toward the ridge. I noticed tracks after 20 minutes. Not human, elk. Older than the snowfall. Ranger ignored them. He was following something else. Darkness arrived fast. I switched on my headlamp. Snowflakes flashed through the beam like sparks. The higher we climbed, the more often the radio crackled. Sometimes there was only static. Twice I heard the distress sequence. Once I thought I heard a man speaking, but the words were impossible to understand. After an hour, Ranger stopped beside a tree marked with orange paint. I brushed snow from the trunk. Beneath it was an old metal tag nailed into the bark. The lettering had nearly rusted away. I could make out only 2 words. Rescue route. I had lived in that valley for much of my life. I had never heard of a rescue route on Black Ridge. We continued. More markers appeared. Orange paint on stone. Rusted reflectors, pieces of cable disappearing beneath the snow. Someone had once maintained a trail here. Someone had gone to considerable effort to make sure it could be followed in terrible weather. Then, apparently, everyone had forgotten it existed. Around 7, the wind changed. It came down the mountain carrying a low mechanical hum. Ranger froze, so did I. For one ugly second, that sound became something else in my head. A rotor struggling in thin air, men shouting through headsets. A warning tone. My hand tightened around the radio. A memory pushed forward before I could stop it. White mountains, half a world away. A helicopter dropping toward a landing zone it should never have approached. My best friend, Petty Officer Daniel Cross, grinning at me from the opposite beach less than 10 minutes before everything went wrong. Then Ranger pressed against my leg. Not my wrist this time. His entire shoulder. Warm, solid, present. I placed one hand against his neck. I'm here. The words were for both of us. The memory receded. I had spent 9 years trying not to think about Daniel Cross. I had failed to bring him home. That was the simplest version. The official version contained weather, enemy fire, mechanical failure, and a chain of decisions made by men far above my pay grade. None of it mattered at 3 in the morning when I saw his face. Ranger knew that. He had known Daniel too. We continued upward. The old trail eventually reached a narrow shelf cut across the mountain. There I found the first human footprint, fresh. The edges were still sharp beneath the new snow. Someone had passed through recently. I crouched. Large boot. Deep heel. The stride suggested an adult male carrying weight. Ranger sniffed it and immediately backed away. That surprised me. Not who we're looking for. His ears shifted forward. Then he moved past the print without following it. Whoever had made those tracks was not the scent Ranger cared about. A quarter-mile later we found blood. Only 3 drops on the snow. Dark red. Fresh enough that the center had not frozen. My hand went automatically to Ranger. No injury. I followed the droplets to a cluster of rocks. Nothing. No body, no additional blood, no footprints. It was as if an injured person had appeared there and vanished. Then the radio screamed. I ripped it from my jacket. Static filled the mountainside. Through it came a man's voice, clearer than before. Station 7, repeat. Station 7. I pressed transmit. This is Caleb Rourke. Identify yourself. Silence. Station 7, identify yourself. The voice returned. Do not. Static swallowed the rest. Do not what? I shouted. Nothing. Then very softly. Do not open. The signal died. Ranger growled. It was the first time he had growled all day. He was not looking at the radio. He was looking uphill. Between the trees, perhaps 50 yards away, a light had appeared. Yellow, steady, too low to be a star, too still to be a flashlight. I switched off my headlamp. The darkness became complete except for that single light. Ranger moved forward. I followed slowly. Trees opened around us, revealing something I had never known existed. A building stood against the side of Black Ridge. Not a cabin. Not a house. An old mountain rescue station built from heavy timber and concrete, its lower half buried beneath decades of snow and fallen rock. A steel tower rose behind it, bent but still standing. One window glowed yellow. My skin tightened. Someone's home. Ranger did not react to my voice. His attention had shifted the snow to the splits beside the entrance. I turned my headlamp back on. There were footprints everywhere. Some fresh, some partly filled, at least 2 different boot patterns. One trail entered the station, another led away toward the ridge. I approached the door. A weathered sign hung above it. Black Ridge Mountain Rescue. Beneath that, in smaller letters, Station 7. I stared at the radio in my hand, the same radio that had no battery. Ranger sniffed along the threshold. The door was slightly open. Warm light leaked through the gap. I pushed it wider. Mountain Rescue. Anyone inside? No answer. The front room looked as if its occupants had stepped outside 20 minutes earlier and forgotten to return for 40 years. A table stood against one wall. Rusted hooks held orange rescue jackets. Maps curled beneath cracked glass. An iron stove occupied the center of the room. The yellow light came from an old emergency lamp on the table. I walked toward it. The lamp was electric. A cable ran down the wall into the floor. Somewhere beneath us, power still existed. Ranger began searching. He moved through the room with the same methodical pattern I remembered from our working years. I checked the stove, cold. Dust lay across the table, but not evenly. Someone had disturbed it recently. A metal mug stood near the edge. I touched it, cold. Beside it lay a notebook. Most pages had rotted together. One remained readable. The date stopped me. December 1989. Beneath it were several handwritten names, followed by weather observations. Wind speed, temperature, visibility, avalanche danger. At the bottom of the page, one sentence had been underlined twice. Radio relay active. Do not disconnect until search team returns. I turned the page. Nothing. The next sheet had been torn out. Ranger barked once from the rear room. I went to him. He stood beside a metal door in the floor. Not a trapdoor exactly. More like an access hatch. A heavy cable disappeared beneath it. The emergency lamp's power line led there too. I knelt and placed my hand on the steel. I felt vibration. Something was running below us. Generator? Ranger sniffed the edge. Then he backed away and sneezed. Diesel. That made sense. What did not make sense was who had fueled it. I pulled the hatch open. A ladder descended into darkness. Warm air rose from below, carrying the smell of oil, wet stone, and something else. Something Ranger recognized before I did. He became rigid. His breathing changed. What? He whined. Not fear. Distress. Then he started down the ladder. Ranger, he ignored me. I followed. 20 feet below was a concrete service tunnel running into the mountain. Electrical cables lined one wall. Old pipes lined the other. Several ceiling lights glowed weakly. Someone had restored power here recently. We passed a generator room. The machine was old but running. Beside it sat 2 red fuel cans. Knew I touched one. No dust. Someone was maintaining this place. Ranger moved faster. At the end of the tunnel we found another room. It had once been a communications center. Radio equipment covered an entire wall. Most of it was dead. One receiver remained active, its green display flickering. A speaker hissed with static. I stepped closer. That's impossible. Ranger ignored the equipment. He went to a row of metal lockers and stopped at the last one. He sniffed the door, then sat. I opened it. Inside hung an orange rescue jacket, a climbing harness, and an old canvas pack. Nothing unusual until I saw the patch stitched above the jacket pocket. Elias Rourke, my father's name as I stood there unable to move. Elias had never told me he worked mountain rescue. Not once. I pulled the jacket free. Something fell from the pocket and struck the concrete floor. A photograph. I picked it up. 4 men stood in front of Station 7 during winter. All were young. All wore rescue jackets. One was my father. Another I did not recognize. The third had his face scratched away with something sharp. But the 4th man made the room tilt beneath my feet. I knew that face. I had seen it in framed photographs throughout my childhood. I had stood beside his grave every Memorial Day until I joined the Navy. His name was Thomas Rourke, my father's younger brother. The uncle, I had been told, died in a climbing accident before I was born. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a date and 6 words. The night we left him up there. Ranger suddenly turned toward the communications equipment. Static filled the speaker. Then a voice emerged, clearer than any transmission I had heard on the mountain. Elias? I stopped breathing. Elias Rourke, answer me. The voice sounded old, weak, terrified, but alive. I grabbed the microphone. Elias is dead. This is his son, Caleb. Who is this? For several seconds, only static answered. Then the man on the other end whispered something that changed the entire reason I had come to Black Ridge. Caleb, if Elias is dead, then there is nobody left to stop them from opening the shaft. Behind me, Ranger began growling at the tunnel. Footsteps were approaching through the darkness. The footsteps stopped before they reached the communications room. Ranger's growl deepened, not loud, not wild, just low enough that I felt it through the concrete floor. I set the old microphone down and moved beside the doorway. There was no weapon in my hand. I had Elias's hunting knife on my belt, but bringing a knife to an unknown situation in a narrow tunnel was the sort of thing that made a man feel brave for about 3 seconds and stupid for the rest of his life. The overhead lights flickered. Somewhere behind me, the radio speaker hissed. Then a man's voice came from the tunnel. "Caleb Rourke?" I said nothing. "I know you're in there." Ranger's ears pushed forward. The man took one more step into the weak light. He looked to be in his late 60s, maybe 70, thin but not frail, wrapped in an old canvas mountain coat with snow melting from the shoulders. A gray beard covered most of his face. His right hand was empty and raised where I could see it. His left hand held a flashlight pointed at the floor. "Easy," he said. "I am not here to hurt you. You know my name. I knew your father." Everybody suddenly knew my father. Something moved behind him. Ranger lunged one step forward and barked. The man froze. "I'm alone." Then why were there 2 sets of tracks outside? His expression changed. Only for a second. But I saw it. Because somebody else got here before me. Who? That is a longer answer than you want right now. Try me. The man slowly lowered his hood. A scar ran from beneath his left ear to the side of his jaw. His eyes were pale green and exhausted. "My name is Warren Hale." The name meant nothing to me. He seemed disappointed by that. "You really don't know." "Know what?" Warren glanced toward the locker where Elias's jacket still hung. "Your father and I pulled men off this mountain together for 9 winters. I looked at the photograph in my hand. Were you here in 1989? He did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. "Were you here the night Thomas Rourke disappeared?" Warren closed his eyes. Ranger stopped growling, but he did not relax. "Yes." The word landed quietly. I held up the photograph. "This says you left him up there." Warren looked at the back of the picture. "That is not what happened." "Then tell me what happened." "Not yet." Anger rose so quickly I almost welcomed it. Anger is easier than grief, easier than confusion. Easier than standing in a forgotten rest station beneath a mountain, this Friedrichstalchen, while strangers kept telling you that your dead father had lived an entire life you knew nothing about. I stepped toward Warren. "I have had enough of not yet." He stared at me. "Then you need to understand something first. If the lower shaft has been opened, this mountain is about to become very dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Warren looked past me toward the radio equipment. "Did someone contact you?" I nodded. "A man asked for Elias." For the first time, Warren looked genuinely afraid. "What did he say?" "He said there would be nobody left to stop them from opening the shaft." Warren whispered something under his breath. "What shaft?" He turned toward the tunnel. "We need to go upstairs." "I am not going anywhere until you answer me." "Caleb, if the people I think are here have already found the lower access, every minute matters." Ranger suddenly moved toward Warren and sniffed the side of his coat. Warren stayed perfectly still. Ranger circled him once, then returned to me. No alert, no aggression. That did not mean the man was honest. It only meant he was not carrying the scent Ranger considered a threat. I followed him upstairs. The wind had strengthened outside. Snow swept past the windows in thin white bands. Warren went directly to an old wall map and pulled away the cracked plastic cover. Beneath the faded contour lines, someone had marked a red circle near the northern face of Black Ridge. "This is Station 7, he said, pointing to our location. His finger moved almost 3 miles north. "And this is the lower shaft, mine?" "Originally." He nodded. silver and lead, closed before the Second World War. In the 1970s, the Forest Service converted part of the upper tunnels into emergency storage. Medical supplies, fuel, rescue equipment. Why would anyone care about old rescue supplies now? Warren looked at me. Because that is not all they stored. I waited. He hesitated, and the hesitation made me want to put my fist through the map. During the Cold War, the federal government used remote mountain sites for communications backup. Most were dismantled. This one was not. There is an underground relay chamber connected to a narrowband emergency system designed to keep operating even if normal networks failed. I thought of the empty radio. That explains a radio without batteries. Warren looked toward it. No. Good. I was starting to think I was losing my mind. That radio belonged to Elias. I figured that much out. It was modified. Warren opened the back and pointed to a thin metal plate I had mistaken for part of the casing. Induction receiver. If you are close enough to the buried transmission cable, it can draw enough energy from the field to receive a weak signal. I stared at him. So the farther north Ranger led me, the stronger the signal became. Exactly. That was comforting, in the least comforting way possible. Physics was better than ghosts, usually. Who is transmitting? I do not know. Who are the other people? That I might know. Warren walked to the window and looked into the snow. 3 months ago, a private survey company filed a request to inspect mineral rights on the north side of the ridge. The company was legitimate. The men behind it were not interested in minerals, interested in the relay, interested in what is beside it. Which is? Warren's jaw tightened. Records. I almost laughed. You dragged me through all that suspense for records. Names, Caleb. Rescue logs. Radio recordings, incident reports. Things that were never supposed to survive. My attention returned to the photograph. Thomas. Warren nodded. Your uncle is part of it. I felt the room change. Tell me. Before he could speak, Ranger snapped toward the front door. A second later, headlights swept through the blowing snow. Warren killed the emergency lamp. Darkness swallowed the room. Outside, an engine idled. A vehicle had reached Station 7 using a trail I had barely been able to follow on foot. That told me whoever was inside knew the mountain. A door slammed, then another. 2 men, maybe 3. Ranger moved silently to the wall beside me. Warren whispered, "Back tunnel. Who are they?" "People who believe Elias left something here." Heavy footsteps crossed the porch. Someone tried the handle locked. "It's a man outside," said Mr. Hale. "We know you're inside." Warren's face drained of color. "So much for strangers, they know you." Unfortunately, the man outside knocked 3 times. Calmly, "Open the door, and nobody needs to spend the night bleeding." I leaned close to Warren. "Still think we should run?" "I think we should survive." The front door shuddered beneath a hard impact. Ranger bared his teeth. Another strike rattled the hinges. Warren pointed toward Sorrow's storage room behind the stove. We moved. He pulled aside a metal cabinet and exposed an opening barely wide enough for a man. Cold air poured through. Maintenance passage. Comes out east of the station. I pushed Ranger through first, then followed. Warren crawled in behind me and dragged the cabinet back into place. Seconds later, the front door crashed open. Voices entered the station. Flashlights moved through the cracks behind us. "Find the dog," someone said. My blood went cold. Not find Hale, not find Caleb. "Find the dog." Ranger heard it too. His breathing changed. I touched his neck. Quiet. We crawled through darkness for nearly 200 feet before the passage rose into a collapsed drainage culvert hidden beneath snow. By the time we emerged, the station was a faint glow behind the trees. Warren immediately turned north. "Where are you going?" "Lower shaft. Those men are at the station, which means they are not at the shaft, unless more are. Then we find out." There was something about the way he said it that told me Warren had spent decades running from this mountain and had finally decided he was tired. I knew that feeling. We moved through the forest without lights for several hundred yards. Clouds thickened overhead, snow fell harder. Warren knew old paths that barely existed. Ranger walked between us, occasionally dropping his nose to the ground. After perhaps 40 minutes, he stopped beside a fallen pine and began circling. "What is it?" Ranger moved uphill, then downhill, then returned to the same spot. A scent cone. He had something. We followed him off the trail. 50 yards later, he found the blood. More this time. A smear across a rock, then a torn piece of dark fabric. Warren crouched. One of theirs? Maybe. Ranger pulled forward. The trail descended into a ravine where the snow had drifted waist deep. The dog disappeared behind a boulder and barked. I climbed after him. A man lay against the rocks. Mid-50s, stocky, gray hair. Winter jacket ripped at the shoulder. Blood covered one side of his face. He was alive, barely. Warren knelt. "I know him, friend, no." The injured man opened his eyes. Panic filled them when he saw Warren. They opened it. Warren leaned closer. "Who? Mercer's people?" "How, maybe 6. The man coughed hard. They thought it was storage. His eyes found me. "Who are you?" "Caleb Rourke." His expression changed completely. "Elias's boy." I hated how many strangers knew me that day. He grabbed my sleeve with surprising strength. "Your father was right." "About what?" "They should have sealed the whole mountain." His hand loosened. Thomas never fell. My chest stopped. "What did you say?" The man looked past me, already fading. He went inside. Inside where? But he lost consciousness before answering. Warren checked his pulse, alive. "You knew he would not meet my eyes." "Warren." I knew Thomas did not die in a climbing accident. My anger came back, hotter now. "And my father lied to me for 47 years. Your father protected you for 47 years. From what?" Warren stared north into the storm. "From discovering that Thomas Rourke may still have been alive, after everyone agreed to call him dead." The words made no sense. "Thomas would have been an old man now." "You said may, because we never found a body. Then why stop searching?" Warren's face twisted with a kind of shame I recognized. The expression of a man who had replayed the same decision for decades. "Because Elias ordered us to." I stared at him. "My father stopped the search for his own brother?" Warren nodded. "And every man on that rescue team hated him for it." Ranger suddenly barked toward the ridge. A light flashed far above us. Then another. Headlamps. Moving down, we dragged the injured man beneath an overhang and covered him with our spare insulation. Warren marked the location on his map. "We come back with help. If he freezes, there may not be a later. If they catch us here, there will not be a later for any of us." I hated that he was right. We continued north. The terrain became steeper, rockier, darker. The old rescue markers appeared again, but several had been recently uncovered. Someone else was following the route. Near midnight, the trees ended. Black Ridge rose above us like a wall. At its base stood the remains of a mining structure, half crushed by an avalanche decades earlier. New tire tracks cut across the snow. A generator hummed somewhere inside. Ranger moved toward an opening in the rock and froze. He smelled the air. Then he looked at me in a way I had seen only twice before. Once before finding a trapped child after an earthquake. Once before entering a building where 3 men were waiting with rifles. He had found something important, and he did not like it. Warren whispered, "Lower shaft." We entered. Electric lights had been strung along the tunnel. Fresh cables ran over old wooden beams. Whoever had come here was not exploring. They were operating. 100 feet in, we heard voices. Warren led me into a side passage. Through a break in the rock, I saw 3 men around a steel door built into the mountain. One was using cutting equipment on the hinges. Another watched a laptop. The third carried a rifle. "Private mineral survey," I whispered. Warren gave me a humorless smile. The cutting stopped. Metal groaned. The steel door opened inward. A gust of stale air swept through the tunnel. The men shined lights inside. One of them laughed. "We found it." Ranger stiffened. From somewhere beyond the open door came a sound so faint I almost dismissed it. Tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 pause, tap. Ranger moved toward the opening. I held him back. The tapping continued. Deliberate. Repeating. Not machinery, not dripping water. A pattern. Warren heard it too. His face went pale. "That cannot be." "What?" he whispered. "That was Thomas's rescue code." The men ahead stepped through the steel doorway one by one. Ranger pulled harder. Then my empty radio crackled against my jacket. A voice came through, weak but unmistakable. "Caleb," I froze. It was not the stranger from before. This voice was older, rougher, almost buried beneath static. "Caleb Rourke, if you can hear me, do not trust Warren Hale." Ranger stopped pulling. Slowly, I turned toward the man standing beside me. Warren's face told me he had heard every word. Warren did not move. Neither did I. For several seconds, the only sound in the side passage was Ranger breathing between us and the distant scrape of boots disappearing through the open steel door. The radio against my chest hissed once, then fell silent. I kept my eyes on Warren. "You want to explain that?" He swallowed. "Not here. You have been saying that all night. Because every place we stop becomes dangerous. The voice knew your name, so do a lot of people. The voice told me not to trust you. And you trust a voice coming through a 40-year-old emergency system? More than I trust a man who keeps deciding what I am allowed to know." That hit him. I saw it. Warren looked older suddenly, not weaker, just tired in a way that had nothing to do with the climb. "Fair enough," he said. "Then here is something you are allowed to know. I lied to your father." I said nothing. "I lied to Elias the night Thomas disappeared. I lied in the report. I lied to the county. I lied to the Forest Service. And I spent the next 37 years telling myself I had done it because Elias asked me to." "What did you lie about?" "Thomas was not alone when he went into the lower system." Before I could answer, Ranger's ears snapped toward the main tunnel. Voices were returning. Warren raised one finger. We pressed deeper into the crack between the rocks. A beam of light swept across the opening. One of the men came out first. He was tall, shaved head, rifle hanging low against his chest. Another followed carrying a metal case. "We have power," the second man said. "Not stable. Does Mercer know?" "He knows enough." The name caught my attention. Mercer. Same name the injured man had used. Warren's face tightened. The first man said, "We pull the archive drives, destroy the analog room, and leave before the front comes through." "What about Hale? If he is here, he does not leave." "And Rourke?" A pause. "Same." Ranger shifted against my leg. I put one hand on his collar. The men walked away. When their lights disappeared, Warren whispered, "Now do you understand why I did not want to stand upstairs, explaining family history? Who is Mercer?" "Gavin Mercer." "His father was on the rescue team." "Which rescue team?" "Ours." Another secret. Another dead man I apparently knew without ever hearing his name. I almost laughed. How many people did my father erase from my childhood? Fewer than you think. That is not comforting. Warren looked toward the steel door. "Come on." We crossed the main tunnel quickly. The opening led into a much older section of the mountain. Concrete gave way to rough stone. Electrical conduit ran along one wall, but beneath it I could see timbers blackened with age. The air smelled dry, metallic, old. Ranger moved ahead slowly. The tapping had stopped. "Thomas's rescue code," I whispered. 231? Warren nodded. 2 taps meant conscious. 3 meant trapped. 1 meant location unknown. Convenient code. It was designed for collapsed tunnels, and you heard it the night he disappeared? Warren did not answer. We passed a chamber filled with rusted oxygen tanks and canvas stretchers. Another held shelves of sealed metal boxes. Most had government inventory markings nearly worn away. One box had been opened recently. Inside were reels of magnetic tape. Warren touched one. These are the recordings. Of what? Every emergency transmission routed through Black Ridge for almost 20 years. I looked at the shelves. Including 1989. Yes. Then why did nobody use them to learn what happened to Thomas? Because after the incident, the relay was officially declared damaged. Was it? Warren looked at me. No. That answer made my jaw tighten. Who declared it damaged? Elias signed the report. I stared at him. Warren continued before I could speak. He had reasons. Everybody keeps saying that. Because he did. Then tell me the damn reasons. Ranger suddenly stopped. His nose lifted. He moved to the right-hand wall and sniffed along a narrow crack. Then he scratched once. Metal sounded behind stone. Warren came closer. That passage was sealed. By who, Elias? Of course it was. We found a recessed latch behind a loose stone. The panel opened inward with surprising ease, revealing a narrow maintenance corridor. The air that came through was warmer. Ranger entered first. 10 yards in, he found a boot print in the dust, fresh. Then another. Someone had used the passage recently. Warren swore under his breath. This corridor leads behind the archive chamber. Useful, too useful. We moved carefully. Halfway through, the radio crackled again. I stopped. Static. Then the older voice returned, Caleb. I brought the receiver close. Who are you? You need to get out. Not until you tell me your name. Silence. Then your father called me Ben. Warren went rigid. I looked at him. You know Ben. His face changed in a way I had not seen before. Not fear. Shock. Benjamin Cole. Who is he? Warren whispered. He was the 5th man in the photograph. There were 4 men. Because Benjamin took it. I held the radio closer. Ben, where are you? Below. Below where? Static swallowed half his answer. West chamber. Cannot climb. Are you injured? Old. For the first time, I almost smiled. The voice continued. Do not let Mercer get the blue case. Warren shut his eyes. He knows. Knows what? The case. What case? Elias took it. From who? Thomas. Ranger suddenly growled down the corridor. Light appeared around the bend. We shut off our lamps and flattened against the wall. A man passed the intersection ahead, carrying a flashlight and a pistol. He did not see us. When he disappeared, Warren whispered, There is another route. We continued until the corridor opened behind a steel mesh wall overlooking a large chamber. 6 men were inside. 1 worked at a row of old consoles. 2 carried equipment cases. Another stood over a table covered with maps. The last 2 guarded a heavy door painted blue. Then I saw the man in the center. Mid-40s, tall, expensive cold-weather gear, gray at the temples, posture too relaxed for someone standing in an abandoned mine. Gavin Mercer, Warren whispered. Gavin pointed toward the blue door. Open it. One of his men said, We still do not know what condition the shaft is in. Then find out. Hale may be nearby. Hale has been nearby for 30 years. It never helped him before. Warren flinched. Gavin continued, The Rourke boy is the problem. I felt something cold move through me. Why? One man asked. Gavin looked toward the old consoles. Because Elias trained that dog. Ranger's body tightened beside me. No, I whispered. Warren did not answer. Gavin said, The animal can find the west access. Elias used dogs to reach it after the collapse. My hand slowly left Ranger's collar. My father trained him? Warren looked trapped. Not exactly. What does not exactly mean? Ranger was assigned to you years later. Elias never handled him in service. Then what is Mercer talking about? A bloodline. I stared at him. You have got to be kidding me. Elias worked with search dogs on this mountain before you were born. One of them was a German shepherd named Bishop. Ranger looked at us as if his name had almost been called. Bishop found Thomas's route after the collapse. And Ranger? Same working line. Several generations removed. It sounded ridiculous until I remembered every impossible turn Ranger had taken since the road. The radio, the old rescue trail, the station, the lower shaft. You knew this before tonight, I suspected. Did Elias? Warren's silence answered. Below us, Gavin's men forced the blue door open. Cold air rolled into the chamber. One man shined a light inside stairs. Gav smiled. Finally, they moved through. We waited until the room emptied. Then Ranger found the weak point in the mesh before I did. He pushed his nose against a lower corner, where corrosion had eaten through the frame. We bent it back and slipped into the chamber. On the table lay a stack of copied documents. I grabbed the top sheet. Incident report, Black Ridge Rescue Failure, December 1989. I scanned Rourke, Warren Hay, Benjamin Cole, Patrick Mercer, Thomas Rourke. 5 men. I looked at Warren. Patrick Mercer, Gavin's father. The report listed Thomas as presumed dead due to fall and avalanche. I turned the page. A section had been blacked out with marker. Under strong light, faint type remained visible. Unauthorized civilian located inside lower shaft. Civilian. Warren looked away. That is what I was trying to tell you. Who? A boy. Everything sighed. Me slowed. What boy? About 10 years old. Maybe 11. What was a child doing in a closed mine? Hiding from what? Warren's voice dropped. From his father. Before he could continue, a shot cracked somewhere below. Ranger barked. Then came shouting. Another shot. A man screamed. Gavin's voice echoed up the stairs. Get him. We ran to the blue door. The stairwell descended steeply through rock. Lights swung below. Ranger pulled forward. No, I told him. He ignored me. The same way he had ignored me on the road. We went down. The stairs ended at an enormous cavern reinforced with old steel arches. A narrow catwalk crossed a black drop. On the far side, 2 of Gavin's men chased someone through another tunnel. The figure moved slowly, leaning on the wall. Old man. Gray hair. Thin frame. Ben, Warren shouted. The old man turned. One of Gavin's men raised his weapon. Ranger launched before I could stop him. He hit the man at the knees, twisting him sideways. The pistol fired into the ceiling. Rock fragments rained down. I reached the second man as he turned. I drove him into the railing. Warren grabbed Ben and pulled him behind a support. Ranger released on command and returned to me. The whole exchange lasted seconds. My body remembered things I had spent years teaching it to forget. Then the mountain groaned. A deep vibration moved through the cavern. Dust fell from overhead. Warren shouted, "Move!" We dragged the 2 disarmed men away from the catwalk and into the side tunnel. Ben collapsed against the wall. He looked older than his voice. Maybe 80. His face was narrow, one eye cloudy, hands shaking badly. Yet when he looked at me, he smiled. Elias's boy, everybody says that. He laughed once, then coughed. You sound like him. You contacted me. I contacted the radio. His eyes moved to Ranger. The dog brought it. You knew Ranger? No, Ben studied him. But I knew that look. Warren knelt beside him. Where is the case? Ben's smile vanished. Mercer has the wrong chamber. Then where? Ben pointed down the tunnel. West. I crouched. What is in the blue case? Ben looked at Warren. Warren looked at the floor. I had enough. Nobody gets to protect me from the truth anymore. Ben nodded slowly. Good. Elias took too long to learn that. Then he told me. In 1989, Thomas Rourke had found a boy hiding near one of the abandoned mine entrances during a winter storm. The child had run from a violent father who was working illegal blasting operations on federal land. Thomas brought him into Station 7. The father followed. A confrontation began. During the search, Thomas discovered evidence of far more than illegal mining. Explosives had been used to open restricted government storage chambers. Rescue equipment was being sold. Emergency radio frequencies were being monitored. The operation involved local contractors, officials, and at least one member of the rescue team. Patrick Mercer, I said. Ben nodded, Gavin's father. Thomas collected proof. Photographs, recordings, names. He placed everything in a blue steel case. Then the storm hit. A collapse sealed part of the lower shaft. Thomas and the boy were trapped on the west side. The rescue team could still communicate with them through the buried relay. So why did Elias stop the search? I asked. Ben's eyes filled with something I did not want to see. Because Thomas told him to. Silence. Why? The boy's father was waiting above with armed men. Patrick Mercer was feeding them our locations. Thomas knew if we brought the child out, they would take him. Then get law enforcement. Ben gave me a sad look. Some of them were law enforcement. The mountain suddenly felt much colder. Thomas stayed underground to keep the boy hidden for 3 days, and then we received one final transmission. Thomas said the boy had reached a secondary exit. He told Elias to seal the access and tell everyone they were both dead. Did the boy survive? Ben stared directly at me. Yes. My chest tightened. Who was he? Ben did not answer immediately. Warren did, your father. I looked at him. Nothing made sense. Elias was already an adult. Not Elias, Warren swallowed. Your biological father. The world stopped. What? Ben reached into his coat and removed a small waterproof pouch. Inside was an old photograph. A boy stood beside Thomas Rourke in this very cavern. Dark hair, frightened eyes, maybe 11 years old. On the back, in Elias's handwriting, was a name I had never heard. Michael Vale. Ben said quietly, Elias did not raise you from birth because he had lost a son. He raised you because years earlier his brother died, saving the boy who would one day become your father. I stared at the photograph until the edges blurred. My father told me my parents died in a car accident. Your mother did, Ben said. Michael disappeared before you were 2. Why? Ben's voice softened. Because the people tied to Black Ridge started looking for him again. Ranger pressed against my leg. I could not feel him at first. My mind had gone somewhere empty. Every story Elias told me, every warning about Black Ridge, every time he refused to discuss my biological family. I had believed silence meant shame or indifference, maybe even rejection. Instead, silence had been a wall built around me by men who had already watched one generation nearly die. Then an explosion shook the tunnel. Lights went out. Darkness slammed down. Gavin's voice echoed from somewhere ahead. Fine grabbed my sleeve. If he gets the blue case, he gets the names. Names of dead men? No. Ben looked terrified. Names of the children they relocated. Children? Michael was not the only one. The emergency network had been used for years to move endangered children through remote ranger stations, shelters, churches, and foster families without leaving obvious trails. Some were escaping violent parents, some were witnesses, some were children nobody believed would survive if returned home. The blue case contained original identities and relocation records. Even after decades, families could still be exposed. Gavin did not want the records for history. He wanted leverage. Where is the chamber? I asked. Ben looked at Ranger. Bishop found it once. The old man reached into his pocket and pulled out a strip of orange rescue cloth sealed in plastic. Elias kept this here. Ranger smelled it once. His entire posture changed. Work. Pure and immediate. Ben whispered that belonged to Thomas. I clipped Ranger's leash free. Find. He disappeared into the darkness. I followed. Behind us, Warren and Ben struggled to keep pace. Ahead, Ranger chose tunnels without hesitation, turning left, then down, then through a gap so narrow we had to crawl. The mountain shook again. Water began dripping from cracks overhead. A storm outside was pushing pressure through old fractures. We reached a chamber where 3 passages met. Ranger stopped. For the first time, he seemed uncertain. He moved left. Returned, moved right, returned. The scent was everywhere. Old fabric, old dust, decades of human passage. Then he did something unexpected. He stopped tracking the cloth. He raised his head and listened. Tap, tap. Pause, tap. Tap, tap. Pause, tap. Warren whispered, impossible. The sound came from behind the center wall. Ranger scratched. We pulled loose rotten boards and found a steel hatch hidden beneath them. On the other side was a room no map showed, Thomas Rourke's final refuge. A cot stood against one wall, empty funes-lined shelves. A rescue helmet rested on a table, and beside it sat a blue steel case. Nobody spoke. I approached slowly. Dust covered the lid except for one clean handprint. Fresh. Someone had been here. Ranger suddenly turned. Too late. Gavin Mercer stood in the hatchway behind us, pistol aimed at my chest. Two men flanked him. His face was calm, almost relieved. Thank you, Caleb, he said. Your father's dog finally finished the job. Elias started. Gavin Mercer kept the pistol steady, but his eyes were on the blue steel case, not on me. That told me almost everything I needed to know. Men who come to kill look at the person. Men who come for something more valuable look past the person. Ranger stood slightly ahead of my left leg, head low, muscles tight, silent now. Warren had one hand raised. Ben leaned against the stone wall, breathing hard after the crawl through the lower passages. Behind Gavin, his two men filled the only visible exit. The hidden chamber was small enough that none of us could pretend there was room for mistakes. Gavin nodded toward Ranger. Call him back. He is back. I mean under control. If he were not under control, we would not be talking. One of Gavin's men shifted his grip on the rifle. Ranger's eyes moved to him, then back to Gavin. Gavin smiled faintly. Elias used to talk like that. I felt my jaw tighten. You knew him well? Better than you did, apparently. Warren said, do not. Gavin looked amused. Still protecting him, Warren. Elias is dead. Thomas is dead. Patrick is dead. Half the men who created this disaster are dead. And somehow you are still standing in a hole, deciding which truths Caleb is mature enough to hear. Warren lowered his eyes. Gavin looked at me again. That must be exhausting. You came a long way to discuss my family. I came for the case. Then why not take it? His smile disappeared. Because Elias changed the lock. I glanced at the blue case. Up close, I could see a narrow brass mechanism recessed beneath the handle. Not a modern combination lock. Something older. 4 rotating plates, each engraved with symbols instead of numbers. Pine tree, mountain, dog, radio tower. Compass, snowflake. Lantern, crossed ropes. Gavin continued. We found the chamber months ago. I looked at Ranger, then back at him. You said the dog finished the job. We found the outer access. Not this room. The old plans ended 50 yards from here. Your dog found the final wall. Ben whispered, Bishop's Root. Gavin ignored him. Even after we found the chamber, we could not open the case. So you need me. I need what Elias taught you. He never told me this place existed. That does not mean he taught you nothing. The statement landed harder than he probably intended. Elias had taught me thousands of things without ever explaining why. How to orient myself when snow erased trails, how to read wind by watching spruce needles, how to repair an analog radio, how to tie knots blindfolded because, according to him, one day your hands may have to remember when your eyes cannot. As a boy, I thought every father taught things like that. Maybe I had been training for a mountain I did not know existed. Gavin pointed at the case. Open it. No. You have not even asked what happens if you refuse. I have met men with guns before. This is not Afghanistan, Caleb. My vision narrowed for half a second. He saw it. That irritated me more than the words. No, I said. It is Montana, which means you should know better than to assume a mountain belongs to you just because you brought paperwork and weapons. One of his men laughed. Gavin did not open the case. Suppose I cannot. Then Warren does. Warren shook his head. I never knew the sequence. Gavin pointed the pistol toward Ben. Maybe the old man does. Ben gave him a tired smile. Your father tried the same approach. Gavin's face hardened. My father died with his name dragged through mud by men like you. Patrick Mercer died wealthy. He died accused. Because he was guilty. According to Elias. According to recordings. Gavin stepped closer. Recordings nobody ever heard. Ben looked at the blue case. Because Patrick tried to destroy them. Because Elias controlled the story. Something in Gavin's voice changed then. I recognized it. He believed that. Not all of it maybe, but enough. This was not simply greed. Gavin had spent years building himself around a version of his father that could survive the evidence. I had seen men do that with war. Marriage, addiction, failure. Sometimes the truth does not threaten what a man owns. It threatens who he thinks he is. What do you think is in that case? I asked. Gavin answered immediately. Proof that Elias fabricated the incident to protect Thomas. Warren said, that is not what happened. Gavin turned on him. You signed the false report because Thomas asked us to protect the boy. You buried my father with it. Patrick helped armed men hunt a child through this mountain. That is what Elias told you. Ben pushed away from the wall. His voice trembled, but not from fear. I heard Patrick on the radio. Gavin stared at him. You were a dispatcher. I was standing 10 feet from him when he gave those men our search coordinates. Silence settled across the room. Gavin looked away first. Opened the case. I studied the symbols. 4 plates. Elias loved practical puzzles, never riddles for entertainment. Every answer usually came from something you could touch. I remembered winter mornings when I was 9 or 10. Elias taking me into the woods before dawn. He would stop unexpectedly and ask, if you lose the trail, what do you trust first? I always answered compass. He would shake his head, wrong. A compass tells you north. It does not tell you home. Then he would point to the dog we had back then, an old shepherd mix named Scout. Trust what can smell what you cannot see. Dog, another memory surfaced. Elias fixing the radio on the kitchen table. When the storm takes the road, what keeps people alive? A shelter communication. Radio tower. Another. Standing with him on a ridge while snow came sideways. What is the mountain's first warning? I had guessed wind. He had answered silence. When everything living stops making noise, pay attention. Snowflake? No. Mountain? I looked again. 4 plates. Gavin grew impatient. Caleb. Thinking. Ranger bought the case and sniffed. Then his nose touched one symbol. Dog. I rotated the first plate until the dog aligned with the brass mark. Nothing happened. Gavin's men watched. Good boy, I whispered. I thought of Elias's lessons. Trust what can find the path. Dog first. What came after? Communication. I turned the second plate to the radio tower. A faint click came from inside the lock. Gavin inhaled sharply. Warren looked at me. You know it, maybe. The third symbol came from another lesson I had forgotten until that moment. Elias and I once became caught above the tree line in a sudden whiteout. I was 14, terrified but trying not to show it. He made me kneel and put one hand against exposed rock. When you cannot see where you are going, stop fighting the mountain. Feel what is still there, mountain. I turned the third plate. Another click. 1 plate remained. Compass, snowflake, lantern. Crossed rope. Pine tree. My mind searched through 30 years of small memories. Then I remembered the funeral morning. Not the cemetery. Earlier. Elias's room. His breathing shallow, Ranger lying outside the door. Elias had been too weak to speak much, but he looked at me and said something I thought came from medication. When you find the dark place, do not follow the compass. I leaned close. What? Follow the light someone left for you? At the time I assumed he was talking about grief. Maybe he was. Maybe Elias had always been good at making one lesson carry 2 meanings. I turned the final plate to the lantern. The lock released with a heavy metallic snap. Nobody moved. Gavin's eyes widened. I placed one hand on the lid. Before I open it, you put the gun down. He almost laughed. You are not negotiating, then you have a locked case. You just unlocked it, and my hand is still on it. Move, no. The rifleman behind him stepped closer. Ranger growled. Gavin raised one hand to stop him. Fine. He lowered the pistol but did not set it down. Open it. I lifted the lid. Inside was not what I expected. No money, no government hardware, no neatly stacked intelligence files. There were 3 bundles wrapped in waxed cloth, several magnetic tapes, a smaller wooden box, photographs, and a thick ledger sealed inside plastic. On top lay an envelope addressed in Elias's handwriting. Caleb. My name looked strange there, too personal for the room. Gavin reached forward. I took the envelope first. The ledger. Wait. I did not come here for your father's farewell note. Then you can keep waiting. I opened it. The paper inside had been folded once. Elias's handwriting was shaky, probably written near the end of his life. I read silently at first. Caleb, if you have reached this room, then I failed to keep Black Ridge buried. But perhaps I succeeded in keeping you alive long enough to decide what should happen next. My throat tightened. Gavin said, read it later. I ignored him. There are things I should have told you while I was alive. I convinced myself silence was protection. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was cowardice wearing protection's coat. You deserved better from me. Ranger pressed his shoulder against my leg. I kept reading. Thomas did not die the night we ended the search. My eyes stopped. Warren whispered, Caleb. I looked at him. You said he was dead. Warren's face went gray. I believed he was. I returned to the letter. Thomas survived the collapse. He stayed underground after Michael reached the western exit because someone had to keep Patrick and the others searching in the wrong direction. Benjamin and I received his transmissions for another 6 days. On the 7th day, they stopped. We returned after the armed men left. We found blood, his jacket, and the blue case. We never found Thomas. Ben stared at the floor. I turned toward him. You knew he survived 6 more days. Yes. Why did you tell me he died saving Michael? Because we believed he did. The letter continued. Years later, I found evidence that Thomas left Black Ridge through a ventilation route on the north face. I searched for him quietly. I found signs, never the man. If he survived, he chose not to return. I do not know why. The words disturbed me more than a confirmed death would have. A dead man closes one door. A missing man leaves every door open. Gavin stepped closer. Enough, I held the letter away. There is more. Patrick Mercer knew Michael escaped. For years he searched for the boy because Michael could identify him. When Michael grew older, he returned to Montana and tried to expose what happened. That is when Patrick found him again. Michael disappeared before Caleb's 2nd birthday. I told Caleb his father abandoned him because the truth would have sent him looking. I told myself hatred was safer than hope. Caleb, I am sorry. My hands began to shake. Not much. Enough. All my life, whenever I thought about Michael, I pictured a young man walking away from a child because staying was inconvenient. I had hated a silhouette built from a lie. What happened to him? My voice sounded unfamiliar. Ben answered. We never knew, Gavin said. You are falling for another Rourke story. I turned on him. Your father was looking for Michael, according to Elias and according to Ben, a senile man living under a mountain. Ben smiled. Still sharp enough to remember your father begging me to erase a tape. Gavin's eyes flashed. Where is it? Ben pointed toward the case. Probably right there. Gavin lunged. Ranger moved faster. He slammed into Gavin's forearm before the pistol cleared his side. The shot exploded into the ceiling. Everything happened at once. Warren tackled one rifleman. I drove my shoulder into the second. The blue case fell from the table, spilling tapes and papers across the stone floor. Gavin hit Ranger hard with his elbow. Ranger released and circled. Another shot cracked. Ben shouted. The overhead lights shattered. Darkness swallowed us. Men cursed. Boots scraped. I heard Warren grunting somewhere to my right. Ranger barked once, sharp and close. I dropped low. A body moved past me. I caught a wrist, twisted, felt metal fall, then drove the man into the wall. The mountain groaned beneath us. A deeper sound followed. Not gunfire, rock moving. "Stop shooting," Warren shouted. "You will bring the ceiling down." Nobody listened. A flash lit the room. Gavin fired toward Ranger. The bullet struck stone. Ranger yelped. My entire body turned cold. Ranger, no answer. I moved toward the sound. Another vibration rolled through the chamber. Dust filled my mouth. Then a section of ceiling collapsed between us and the exit. The roar erased everything. Rocks slammed into the floor. Air punched from my lungs. I covered my head and felt debris strike my back. When the sound stopped, darkness returned. Complete. I reached for my headlamp. Broken. Ranger. A whine came from behind me. I crawled toward it. My hand found fur. Warm. Ranger was standing, but one rear leg trembled. I ran my hands over him. No blood at first. Then I found a shallow cut near his hip. "Easy, buddy." He licked my wrist, the old signal. "Stay here. Stay now." Even injured, he was grounding me. I pressed my forehead against his. "I am here." Warren coughed somewhere beyond the dust. "Caleb, alive." "Ben?" No answer. "Ben," a weak voice came from farther left. "I have had better evenings." Relief moved through me. Then Gavin spoke from the darkness. My leg, I almost ignored him. Almost. Ranger turned toward the voice. "Training is a strange thing. It survives anger. It survives grief. Sometimes it even survives hatred." I crawled toward Gavin. A slab of stone pinned his lower leg. One of his men lay unconscious beside the wall. The other was gone, either behind the collapse or through another passage. Warren found an emergency lamp in the debris and managed to get it working. Pale red light filled the chamber. Gavin looked at me. "Get it off. Your men tried to kill us, and you are still going to help me." He said it as if it were an insult. That is the difference between us. Warren and I used a broken steel support as a lever. It took 3 attempts. Gavin screamed when his leg came free. The injury looked bad, but not catastrophic. We dragged him beside the wall. Ranger limped toward the spilled case. He sniffed the tapes, the ledger, then stopped at the wooden box. His ears rose. He pawed it once, and I opened it. Inside was an old cassette recorder wrapped in cloth. Beside it lay a single tape marked "Final Transmission, Thomas Rourke." Warren stopped breathing. Ben whispered, "Elias told me he destroyed that." Apparently Elias lied to everybody. I found batteries sealed in the box. Amazingly, they were newer than the recorder. Someone had maintained the package. Ben, perhaps, or Elias on one of his secret trips. I inserted the tape. Gavin said, "Do not." That was the first time he sounded afraid. I pressed play. Static. Then a younger man's voice filled the chamber. Calm, exhausted. "Station 7, this is Thomas. Michael is out." "Repeat." "The boy is out." Ben closed his eyes. Another voice answered. Elias. Younger than I had ever known him. "Thomas, we are coming back for you. Negative. We are not leaving you. Patrick is still monitoring the channel." Then another voice cut across the recording. Harsh. Angry. Patrick Mercer's. "Elias, you bring that boy out, and every person helping him goes down with you." Gavin stared at the recorder. The tape continued. Thomas said, "Patrick, you touch that child, and I swear this mountain will be the last thing you ever see." Patrick laughed. "You think anybody will believe a washed-up rescue volunteer over a deputy?" I looked at Gavin. He seemed unable to move. The recording became chaotic. Wind static. Thomas breathing hard, then Elias again. "We have another route." "Hold on." Thomas answered, "No." "Listen to me. Michael knows the north vent. Bishop can guide him. Protect the boy. Protect the records. I will keep them here." There was a pause. Then Thomas said something softer. Elias, if I do not come back, do one thing for me. Anything. Make sure that kid grows old enough to forget this place." The tape clicked. Static. Then several minutes later, Thomas returned. His voice was weaker. "Michael made it." Elias answered, crying openly now. "Yes, good." Another pause. Then Gavin whispered, "Turn it off." I did not. Patrick's voice appeared again on the tape. "Thomas, give me the case." Thomas laughed. "Come get it." Then gunfire, shouting, the tape distorted. A final voice came through, Patrick yelling to someone else. "Find Michael Vale. If the boy talks, we all burn." The recording ended. Nobody spoke for a long time. Gavin looked as if someone had removed the floor beneath his entire life. "My father never told me," Ben said quietly. "Men like Patrick rarely leave their children the truth. They leave them excuses." Gavin stared at the ground. For the first time, I almost saw the child beneath the man. Almost. Then Ranger suddenly turned toward the western wall. He sniffed the air. His ears rose. A cold draft had begun moving through a crack behind the shelves. Ben looked at it. North ventilation route. Warren shook his head. Collapsed decades ago, maybe not. Ranger scratched. The crack widened. Fresh air came through. Then faintly, from somewhere beyond the stone, we heard a human voice. Not radio, real, help. Warren and I looked at each other. Another voice followed. Younger, terrified. "Please, somebody." Gavin frowned. "Who is that?" Ben's face changed. The storm. I did not understand until Warren grabbed the map. A major winter front was crossing the ridge. The same storm that had been building since we entered the mountain line north. The north ventilation route opened near an old snowmobile trail. If travelers had taken shelter near the mine, a slide could have trapped them. Ranger was already digging at the loose stone. I looked at the blue case. At Gavin, at the recorder, at all the answers I had spent a lifetime not knowing. Then the cry came again, "Help us!" Ranger looked at me. That was the moment the story inside my head changed. Until then, Black Ridge had been about my father, my uncle, my childhood, my anger, my right to know what everyone had hidden from me. But somewhere on the other side of that wall, people were alive right now. People who did not care what happened in 1989. People whose entire future might depend on whether I kept digging into the past or put it down long enough to save them. Elias had made that choice. Thomas had made that choice. Maybe Michael had too. I stood Warren secure the case. Gavin stared at me. "You are leaving it? For now. After all this, the dead have waited 37 years. The living do not have that luxury." Ranger barked once. We tore into the ventilation passage. The opening was narrow, steep, half filled with ice. Warren followed. Ben stayed oaked with Gavin and the unconscious man. We crawled upward for what felt like forever, pushing loose rock ahead of us. Ranger squeezed through places I could barely fit. The air grew colder. Snow began blowing into the tunnel. Finally, we broke through onto the north face of Black Ridge. The storm had arrived in full. Wind nearly knocked me backward. Visibility was less than 30 feet. Ranger immediately turned east and ran, limping but determined. I followed. Warren struggled behind me. We found the first survivor 50 yards from the vent, a woman buried to her chest in avalanche debris, conscious but fading. Beside her was a teenage boy, trying desperately to dig with bare gloves. Farther downhill, another snowmobile lay crushed beneath branches. Ranger moved toward it and barked. There were more people. The mountain had stopped being a mystery. It had become a rescue. And somewhere beneath us, trapped among the evidence of everything my family had hidden, Gavin Mercer still held one final truth I had not yet discovered. Because as Warren and I began digging the woman free, Ranger suddenly froze, lifted his head into the storm, and looked farther up the ridge. Through the whiteout came a whistle, 3 short blasts. Pause, 3 more. Warren dropped his shovel. His face went completely still. What is it? He stared into the storm. That signal has not been used since Thomas Foss appeared. The whistle came again. 3 short blasts. Ranger turned toward it and pulled away from the rescue site. I grabbed his collar. Ranger, stay. He fought me harder than he had at the road. Warren whispered, Caleb. What? He pointed into the white darkness above us. Whoever is blowing that whistle knows your uncle's personal rescue call. I looked at Ranger. The dog was trembling, not from cold, not from injury. Recognition. Somewhere above Black Ridge, in the middle of a blizzard, someone was calling him toward the mountain using a signal that should have died almost 4 decades ago. The whistle came again through the whiteout, 3 short blasts, a pause, then 3 more, and Ranger pulled so hard against my hand that his collar pressed deep into the fur around his neck. For 1 second I wanted to follow him. Every question I had carried up Black Ridge seemed to be waiting somewhere inside that storm. Thomas Rourke, Michael Vale, my father's lies, Elias's secrets. The signal belonged to a dead man, or to someone who knew enough about that dead man to make me forget everything else. Then the teenage boy beside us shouted, Sir, please, I turned. His mother was barely conscious beneath the avalanche debris. Her lips had begun losing color. Downhill, Ranger had already indicated at least one more person trapped near the crushed snowmobile. The whistle sounded again. Warren looked uphill. Go, he said. I can stay with them, no. Caleb, if that is Thomas, he has waited 37 years. I dropped beside the trapped woman's and started digging. She may not have 37 minutes. Something changed in Warren's face. He nodded once and began digging beside me. Ranger remained tense for several seconds, staring into the storm. Then I touched his shoulder. Search here. Duty overcame curiosity. It always had with him. He turned downhill. The boy crawled close to his mother and kept talking to her, while Warren and I cleared packed snow from around her chest. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. She was 52, a nurse from Idaho, traveling with her son and 2 family friends after a winter trip farther north. They had been trying to beat the storm when the snowmobile trail disappeared beneath refreshing accumulation. One machine slid. The second stopped to help. Then the slope above them broke loose. Rebecca remembered being thrown, and nothing after that. Her son Owen had stayed above the debris only because a tree caught him. My husband, she whispered. He's down there. Ranger barked from near the crushed machine. I crawled toward him. He had found a glove protruding from the snow. We dug. Warren joined me. 10 minutes later we uncovered a man's shoulder. Then his face. Daniel Sloan was unconscious but breathing. Ranger immediately left him and moved farther downhill. There is another, I said. Owen looked terrified. Mr. Keating. Ranger found him beneath a shallow drift against a tree. Arthur Keating was 63 and had a badly injured ankle, but he was awake. His wife was missing. That left one. Marilyn! Arthur shouted into the wind. Nothing answered. Then the whistle came again from uphill. 3 short blasts. Ranger stopped searching. His head rose. I saw the conflict in him. The scent below us, the sound above us. 2 commands written into his instincts. Warren looked at me. That whistle is coming from the same direction as the Old North shelter. What shelter? Emergency hut. Maybe half a mile up. Could Marilyn have reached it? Possible. That changed the problem. Maybe whoever was using Thomas's signal was not calling us away from the rescue. Maybe he was calling us toward the last survivor. I pointed at Warren. Keep Rebecca and Daniel stable. Owen stays with you. Arthur tried to stand. I'm coming. You are not walking anywhere on that ankle. My wife is up there, which is why I need you alive when I bring her back. He stared at me, then reluctantly nodded. I tightened Ranger's collar and leaned close. Find. He turned uphill immediately. We entered the whiteout. The world vanished after 20 feet. There was no horizon, no sky, only moving white. Ranger became my compass. I followed the dark shape of his body as he climbed. Twice he stopped to test the wind. Once he doubled back nearly 50 yards before finding another scent. I could hear Elias in my head. A compass tells you north. It does not tell you home. Trust what can smell what you cannot see. All right, old man, I muttered. I'm listening now. Ranger climbed harder. His injured rear leg bothered him, but he refused to slow until I ordered him to. The whistle came again, closer. Then I saw something through the snow. A dark vertical line. Chimney. The shelter appeared 10 yards later, almost buried. It was smaller than Station 7, a single-room structure built against a rock face. Ranger ran to the door and scratched. "Marilyn," I shouted. A woman answered from inside. "Here." I forced the door open against the snow. Marilyn Keating sat on the floor, wrapped in an old wool blanket. She was pale and shaking but conscious. Beside her stood a man holding a metal rescue whistle. He was very old. That was my first thought. My second was that I knew his eyes. I had seen them in a photograph less than an hour earlier, only the face around them had changed. His hair was completely white and reached the collar of his coat. A beard covered his jaw. His back bent slightly with age, but his shoulders were still broad. One hand gripped a wooden walking staff. The other held the whistle. Ranger stopped in the doorway. The old man looked at him. Neither moved. Then the man made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. "Bishop." Ranger tilted his head. The old man's smile faded. "No, of course not." His eyes lifted to me. I could not speak. He studied my face for several seconds. Then he said, "You have Michael's eyes." My knees nearly gave way. "Thomas?" The old man closed his eyes. Hearing his own name seemed to hurt. When he opened them again, there were tears there. Elias finally sent someone. "Elias is dead." Thomas's face emptied. The storm hammered the shelter walls. Marilyn looked between us, confused. Thomas lowered himself slowly onto a bench. "When?" 4 days ago. He stared at the floor. 4 days, his voice cracked. And I waited 37 years. Anger rose in me before sympathy could stop it. "You waited?" Thomas looked up. "Elias spent years looking for you." "I know." "Then why did you never come home?" His eyes moved toward Ranger. "Because Patrick Mercer survived. Patrick is dead now. He has been dead for years, and his people? Some of them are beneath this mountain right now." Thomas gave me a sad smile. "Then you have your answer." I wanted to demand more. I wanted 37 years explained in 30 seconds. But Marilyn was shivering violently. Rescue first. Questions later. Thomas helped me wrap her in another blanket. He moved slowly but efficiently, like the body remembered work the years had taken away from it. "Can she walk?" I asked. "With help. We have 4 more people downhill." Thomas looked toward the storm. "Then we use the old rope line." He opened a floor compartment and pulled out a coil of thick rescue rope, snowshoes, hand warmers, and an emergency sled. The equipment was old but maintained. "You live here?" "Not here. Where later?" That word again. I almost laughed. Apparently secrecy ran in the family. Thomas secured Marilyn into the sled. Before we left, he knelt in front of Ranger. His hand hovered above the dog's head, but did not touch. "May I?" I nodded. Ranger sniffed his fingers. Then something extraordinary happened. He pressed his forehead into Thomas's palm. The old man's eyes filled. "Same line," he whispered. "Same stubborn look. You knew Bishop. Bishop saved Michael." He looked at me. "And apparently one of his descendants just saved you." We descended using a rope route almost invisible beneath the snow. Thomas knew every anchor point. The whistle had not been some mysterious message intended for me. It was simpler than that, and somehow more powerful. He had heard cries from the avalanche area, found Marilyn wandering in shock, brought her to shelter, then used the old rescue signal, hoping anyone from Station 7 might still remember. The mystery had brought me there, but the signal itself had been exactly what rescue signals were supposed to be. One human being telling another, someone needs help. Warren's expression when he saw Thomas cannot be described by one emotion. He simply stopped. Thomas stopped too. 37 years stood between them in the snow. Warren finally whispered, "You old bastard." Thomas smiled. "You got old." Warren crossed the distance and embraced him. Neither man tried to hide the tears. There are reunions that need speeches. That one did not. We got the survivors moving toward the north shelter. The storm made every 100 yards feel like a mile. Rebecca could walk with assistance. Daniel regained consciousness but was confused. Arthur forgot his injured ankle the moment he saw Marilyn and tried to stand anyway. Owen held his father's arm. Ranger moved between us, checking each person as if counting the pack. For almost 2 hours, Black Ridge became nothing except wind, cold, rope, breath, and the next safe step. I understood then why Elias had loved rescue work. It stripped life down to its simplest truth. Somebody is in trouble. You are able to help, so you help. Everything else can wait. By the time we reached the shelter, darkness had swallowed what little daylight the storm allowed. Thomas lit an old propane heater. Warren treated Daniel. I wrapped Ranger's hip and checked his paws. Only then did Thomas sit across from me. "Ask." "I did, Michael." He nodded. "Your father survived Black Ridge because Bishop found the north ventilation route. I followed them until I knew the boy was clear, then doubled back to keep Patrick searching for me." "Why did you disappear afterward?" "Because Patrick knew I had the evidence. If I returned to Elias, I led him back to Michael. So you just vanished. At first for weeks. Then months. By the time I learned Michael was safe under another name, Patrick had convinced half the county I was dead, and the other half that I was involved in the theft operation. Returning would have reopened everything. Elias searched for you, and I let him." There was no pride in the answer. "That was my sin, Caleb. I told myself I was protecting him. After enough years, protection becomes an excuse for fear." Elias had written almost the same thing. Silence was cowardice wearing protection's coat. Two brothers separated for decades, making the same mistake for the same reason. "Did you know about me?" "Not until you were 6, and you stayed away." Thomas nodded. "I watched sometimes. Anger flashed through me." "You watched?" "From a distance. School baseball game once. Your Navy graduation from farther away than you would believe. I stood. You had no right, I know. Elias raised me while you hid. I know. He died believing you might still be alive." Thomas looked down. "I know." That last answer killed the anger faster than an argument would have. He had no defense, only regret. I sat again. "What happened to Michael?" Thomas was silent for a long time. "He came back. Ben said that. Michael was 27. Married. You were a baby. He wanted the truth cleared so you would not inherit his fear. Elias begged him to leave it buried. Michael refused. Thomas reached inside his coat and removed a small leather wallet. He handed me a photograph. Michael stood beside a pickup truck holding an infant. Me. I knew immediately. No one had to tell me. The way he held the baby was too careful, like he was terrified of dropping the most valuable thing he had ever touched. Patrick's men found him before he reached the state investigator. My throat tightened. Did they kill him? We never proved it. What do you believe? Thomas looked directly at me. Yes. I closed my eyes. For 45 years I had believed my father walked away. He had not abandoned me. He had walked toward the danger because he wanted it ended before I grew old enough to understand fear. Elias had lied because he knew what a boy might do with the knowledge that his father was murdered. He had given me anger instead of a target. I hated the lie. I understood the love behind it. Both things could be true. The blue case proves it. Part of it, what is the rest? Thomas looked toward the floor. Patrick kept a ledger. Payments, names, dates. Michael stole a copy before he disappeared. Where is it? Elias had it, the ledger in the case. Thomas nodded. Then Gavin has access to everything. Gavin? Thomas's expression sharpened when I explained who was below. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he stood faster than I expected. We have to go back. Not in this storm. If Gavin destroys those records, Michael dies a coward in the official story forever. The survivors need evacuation. The old emergency transmitter can call County Rescue from Station 7. And how do we reach it? Thomas pointed toward a radio box mounted beside the shelter door. We do not need to. He connected a cable, adjusted 2 switches, and static filled the room. The buried relay was still alive. Within minutes, Warren reached an emergency frequency. A county rescue coordinator answered. The storm prevented immediate helicopter access, but ground teams were moving toward the lower valley. We gave our position and survivor count. Then another voice interrupted the frequency. Gavin, Caleb. I picked up the microphone. You're alive. Disappointed? Surprised. His breathing sounded strained. Ben is hurt. How badly? He needs help. Then bring him to the north shelter. I cannot. A pause. The lower passage collapsed. Thomas moved closer. Gavin continued. Water is coming into the west chamber. Fast. Warren unfolded the map. His face tightened. Snowmelt pressure. The old drainage system must have broken. How many? I asked. 4. Me, Ben, and 2 of my men. Weapons, Gavin laughed weakly. You are asking conditions for rescue? I am asking whether my dog gets shot when we arrive. Silence. We will put them down. Thomas grabbed my arm. There is another access from the north shelter. Of course there was. Black Ridge seemed to contain more passages than truth. Beneath a storage rack, Thomas uncovered a narrow shaft descending into darkness. Old emergency route. Warren stared. You knew about this? Thomas smiled faintly. I had a lot of free time. I looked at the rescued family. County teams were coming, but not soon. Warren could stay with them. Thomas insisted on coming with me. You are nearly 80, and you do not know the route. Fair point. Ranger stepped toward the opening. Absolutely not, I said. He looked at me. His hip was bandaged. He was exhausted. He had already climbed half a mountain and survived a gunfight and an avalanche. Stay. Ranger sat. I turned toward the shaft. Behind me came the unmistakable sound of paws on metal. I looked back. Ranger was already entering. Thomas laughed. Bishop did that too. I am beginning to dislike your entire bloodline. Mine or his? Both. We descended. The emergency route bypassed the collapsed chamber and entered the lower mine above the flooding west passage. Water already reached my ankles, then my knees. We heard shouting. Ranger found them first. Gavin and 1 man were supporting Ben. The other man had a broken arm. Their rifles lay on the floor well away from them. Gavin looked terrible. His injured leg could barely hold weight. You came back. Do not make me regret it. We moved toward the emergency route. Then the mountain shook again. Water surged around our thighs. The injured man slipped. Ranger barked and turned toward a side chamber instead of the exit. Ranger! He refused to move. He scratched at debris near the wall. Thomas froze. The archive, forget it. Michael's ledger, forget it. Gavin stared at me. Maybe he expected me to choose the evidence. Maybe part of me wanted to. A lifetime of questions sat 20 feet away. Proof that my father had not abandoned me. Proof that Patrick Mercer had hunted him. Proof that Elias's lies were built from protection rather than rejection. Then Ben stumbled. Water climbed higher. I made the easiest decision of the entire night. People first. We left the archive. Thomas and I carried Ben. Gavin helped his injured man despite his own leg. Ranger stayed behind us, checking the group. Halfway to the emergency shaft, a section of tunnel collapsed. The surge knocked Gavin down. Water dragged him toward a broken opening in the floor. I caught his wrist. For 1 second he hung there, staring up at me. This was the man who had threatened Ranger, pointed a weapon at me, and come to Black Ridge prepared to bury the truth again. Caleb! Thomas shouted. The rock beneath me was breaking. Gavin looked at my hand around his wrist. "Why?" he gasped. I pulled harder. "Because your father does not get to decide what kind of man I become." Thomas grabbed my belt. Together we hauled Gavin up. Ranger barked toward the shaft. We climbed. The lower chamber disappeared beneath black water, minutes after the last man cleared it. The blue case, the tapes, perhaps the ledger, all of it seemed lost. Gavin sat against the shelter wall after we returned, staring at nothing. County rescuers arrived near dawn. By then the storm had weakened. Survivors were transported down the mountain, one group at a time. Ben went first because of his injuries. Rebecca and her family followed. Gavin was placed on a rescue sled. Before they took him away, he called my name. I turned. He removed something from inside his coat. A plastic-wrapped book. The ledger. I grabbed it before the water came. He held it toward me. I was going to burn it. I took it. What changed? Gavin looked toward Ranger. Then toward Thomas. Finally back at me. "You came back for me." That was all. Months later, investigators confirmed enough of the surviving records to reopen the Black Ridge case. Patrick Mercer's role in the illegal operation was documented. Michael Vale's attempts to report it were confirmed through letters, recordings, and an investigator's notes preserved in the ledger. His body was never found. I had to learn to live with that. Truth does not always give you everything. Sometimes it only removes the lie. Dean eventually called me after hearing what happened. He offered to transfer Elias's house back. I surprised both of us by saying no. For a long time, I thought that house was home, because Elias lived there. Then I understood Elias had spent his life teaching me that home was not timber, land, or a name on a deed. Home was where someone kept the light on when you were lost. Thomas came down from Black Ridge after 37 years. He did not become family overnight. Life is not that simple. There were arguments, long silences, questions he could not answer, and apologies I was not ready to accept. But he stayed, that mattered. Warren stayed too. Ben recovered. Even Gavin testified. None of us became different men in a single morning. We simply stopped running in the same direction. The following autumn, we reopened Station 7. Not as a museum. Thomas hated that idea. We rebuilt it as a volunteer mountain rescue shelter. New radios, medical supplies, emergency food, avalanche equipment. A weather station. Above the door, we hung a simple wooden sign with 3 names carved into it. Elias Rourke, Thomas Rourke, Michael Vale. I argued that Elias would have hated seeing his name displayed. Thomas said that was precisely why we should do it. Ranger received no sign. He received something he valued more, a bed, and unrestricted access to everyone's sandwiches. Winter returned early that year. One evening I stood outside Station 7 while snow settled across Black Ridge. Ranger lay beside the doorway, gray around the muzzle, watching the trail. Thomas was inside complaining about Warren's coffee. Their voices carried through the open door. I held Elias's old radio in my hand. We had repaired it properly, battery and all. For several minutes, nothing came through except the ordinary chatter of rescue crews farther down the valley. Then Ranger lifted his head. Somewhere in the distance, a whistle sounded. 3 short blasts. Ranger stood immediately. I smiled. "All right, buddy." I reached for my coat. "Let's go bring somebody home." He moved down the trail ahead of me, exactly as he had on the night I thought I had lost everything. Only now I understood what Elias had been trying to teach me all along. A man can lose a house. He can lose his name on a deed. He can lose people he thought would always be there. He can even lose the story he believed about his own life. But as long as there is someone too willing to walk into the storm beside him, he is not walking with nothing. And sometimes the road that looks like it is taking everything away is the same road leading him home. Maybe the greatest lesson Caleb carried down from Black Ridge was that losing a home and being without one are not always the same thing. For most of his life, he believed the people who disappeared had chosen to leave him behind. Only much later did he discover that some of them had walked away because they were trying to stand between him and a danger he was too young to understand. Elias was not a perfect father. Thomas was not a perfect uncle. Michael never had the chance to become the father Caleb deserved. Each man made mistakes, and some of those mistakes caused wounds that lasted for decades. But beneath all those years of silence was something Caleb had never been able to see. People had been choosing him long before he understood what their choices cost. Perhaps that is why Ranger mattered so much. A faithful dog does not need to explain loyalty. He simply stays when the road becomes difficult. He walks beside you when you have nothing left to say. And when the storm becomes so thick that you can no longer see the way forward, sometimes he reminds you that the next step is enough. Many of us reach a season in life when we look back and discover that events we once understood one way were more complicated than we knew. We may never receive every answer. Some doors remain closed. Some people leave before we can ask the questions we should have asked years earlier. But Caleb learned that peace does not always come from recovering everything that was lost. Sometimes it comes from deciding what we will do with what remains. He could not give Michael another lifetime. He could not return 37 years to Thomas. He could not sit beside Elias and finally tell him that he understood. But he could keep Station 7 open. He could answer the radio. He could follow Ranger into another storm when somebody needed help. And he could make certain that another frightened person found a light waiting in the darkness. Perhaps that is one of the quiet ways love survives us. If this story stayed with you, please share in the comments what part meant the most to you and tell us where you are listening from. And if you would like to join us for more stories about veterans, loyal dogs, courage, family, and second chances, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next story in our channel. Until then, take care of the people who still walk beside you, hold close the memories of those who cannot, and remember this: sometimes home is not the place waiting at the end of the road. Sometimes home is the one who refuses to let you walk that road alone.